Hello, dear friends. Welcome to Channel Crime Story Diaries. Thank you for writing us comments with requests to cover events, and here is one of the stories on your requests. Staten Island, one of the 5 boroughs of New York City, rarely finds itself in the national spotlight. However, on February 10, 2016, this quiet suburb was shaken by the news of a horrific crime. The bloody assault in the quiet hotel, which served as a shelter for homeless families, left the local community stunned and sparked a nationwide conversation about this tragedy. Rebecca Cutler, a 26-year-old New Yorker, was originally from Richmond, Virginia. She was known for her bright, vibrant spirit and deep devotion to her children. Despite the challenges she faced, Rebecca remained resilient and hopeful for a better future ahead. Rebecca grew up in a loving family household and always dreamed of having a big family of her own one day. Her 3 little daughters were the center of her whole world, and she did everything in her power to provide them with a happy and stable life. Friends and relatives remember her as a devoted mother who always put her kids' needs first before anything else. However, Rebecca's life was not without its struggles. She faced significant financial hardships and relationship difficulties, particularly with the father of her children, Michael Sykes. In spite of these tough challenges, Rebecca remained firmly determined to create a positive environment for her daughters to grow up in. Rebecca's days were filled with tending to her children, working hard to make ends meet, and spending precious time with her extended family. She frequently visited her own mother, who was an immense source of love and support. Her mother's home was a sanctuary where Rebecca and her kids always felt safe, secure, and surrounded by love. Michael Sykes was 25 years old at the time of the tragedy. He was born and raised in Brooklyn, attending local schools. From 2013, Sykes worked at a Duane Reade pharmacy chain. His criminal record was clean, with no prior convictions officially. In 2015, Michael began a relationship with Rebecca Cutler, and in September of the same year, their daughter Malia was born. Despite having a child together, Michael and Rebecca's relationship was troubled. He repeatedly displayed aggression and jealousy, suspecting his girlfriend of infidelity and monitoring her communication with other men. Conflicts between them grew increasingly frequent. On February 9, 2016, the day before the tragedy, another argument erupted between Sykes and Cutler. Michael forcibly took Rebecca's cell phone, fearing that she was exchanging messages with someone else. This incident was later investigated by the police. Despite the recent altercation, Michael met up with Rebecca and the children the following morning to have breakfast together. Surveillance cameras captured the family returning to the Ramada Inn together around 8 a.m. Nothing seemed amiss, but within an hour, a bloody drama unfolded. Upon returning from breakfast, Rebecca Cutler and her 3 daughters entered their room on the first floor of the hotel. Michael Sykes did not accompany them inside, instead waiting outside. At approximately 8:50 a.m., he entered the room, keeping a hidden kitchen knife at the ready. The next few minutes became the most terrifying in the lives of the hotel's young occupants. An enraged Sykes lunged at Rebecca with the knife, inflicting over 30 stab wounds. The woman quickly lost consciousness due to the numerous injuries. Michael then turned his attention to the children. 1-year-old Ziana and 4-month-old Malia also suffered multiple stab wounds. Not stopping there, Sykes caught up with the oldest girl, 2-year-old Miracle, who was frantically running around the room in panic. In total, during the attack, Michael Sykes wounded his defenseless victims nearly 70 times. This demonstrated the attacker's extreme brutality and fury. Having carried out this bloody assault, Michael Sykes fled the hotel room at 8:54 a.m., leaving behind a horrific scene. Rebecca, Ziana, and Malia were already dead, exsanguinated from dozens of deep wounds. The injured Miracle was still breathing but losing strength. The hidden black-handled knife, from which the victim's blood dripped, lay on the floor among the blood-stained sheets. The mutilated bodies of the mother and daughters remained in the room for about an hour until a housekeeper, who came to clean, discovered them. Around 10 a.m., the woman opened the door to the room and saw the terrible murder scene. She immediately called 911, and within minutes, dozens of police cars, ambulances, and fire trucks arrived at the hotel. Paramedics rushed to save the wounded children. 1-year-old Ziana and 4-month-old Malia were hospitalized at Staten Island University Hospital, but succumbed to their injuries a few hours later. Rebecca Cutler died on the way to the hospital. Only 2-year-old Miracle, despite severe wounds, survived after emergency surgery and prolonged resuscitation. Amazingly, she managed to recover and was later discharged from the hospital into the care of loving relatives. Meanwhile, Michael Sykes, who had committed the brutal attack on his girlfriend and her children, hastily left the hotel and disappeared in an unknown direction. He took public transportation to the St. George Ferry Terminal and then made his way to Manhattan. Along the way, Sykes managed to call his mother, confessing to the crime and hinting at his intention to take his own life. The New York Police Department immediately launched a large-scale search operation as soon as they learned about the circumstances of the murder and the identity of the suspect. Dozens of officers began combing the hotel's surroundings, neighboring streets and parks, hoping to stumble upon the fugitive's trail. Photos of Sykes were posted on wanted signs throughout the city. Citizens were urged to report any information that could help apprehend the attacker to a hotline. While the search was ongoing, Sykes managed to visit the homes of 2 of his friends in Brooklyn. As it turned out later, he spent most of the day after the murder smoking marijuana and playing video games as if nothing had happened. Only one of the friends suspected something was wrong and notified the police. Late in the evening, Sykes finally left his buddy's apartment and headed to Queens, where he had another acquaintance. Detectives investigating the case carefully studied the surveillance camera footage from the Ramada Inn and surrounding streets to reconstruct the suspect's escape route. They also interviewed all possible witnesses, hotel guests, staff, and passers-by. Particular attention was drawn to a video taken at the grocery store where Sykes had breakfast with the victims shortly before the attack. One of the cameras captured the moment when he was arguing and even appeared to hit Rebecca Cutler in front of other patrons. This scene eloquently testified to the tension and conflict in the couple's relationship. Thanks to the persistent work of investigators and numerous reports from concerned citizens, on February 13th, 3 days after the murder, Michael Sykes was apprehended at his acquaintance's apartment on 31st Avenue in Queens. He did not resist the police and was immediately sent for questioning. At a press briefing, Chief of Detectives Robert Boyce provided details of the arrest and thanked everyone who helped track down the fugitive. During interrogations, Michael Sykes initially denied his involvement in the murder of Rebecca Cutler's children. He claimed that the mother herself had done it in a fit of rage, and he then killed her in self-defense. However, the evidence collected at the crime scene and during the investigation unequivocally pointed to his guilt. Staten Island District Attorney Michael McMahon personally led the team of prosecutors in this case. At a press conference, he stated, "The vile and violent nature of this crime makes it our top priority. The public can be assured that we will make every effort to bring the killer to justice." The prosecutor's office charged Sykes on 14 counts, including 3 counts of first-degree murder, attempted murder, kidnapping, menacing, and unlawful possession of a weapon. On February 29, 2016, Michael Sykes appeared in court but refused to plead guilty to the charges against him. The judge appointed him defense attorneys and sent him to Rikers Island to await trial. The victims' relatives were present in the courtroom and could not hold back their emotions. "He's a monster, a real monster. How can a person do this to little children?" sobbed the grandmother of the murdered girls. The trial in the Sykes case began in the fall of 2017 at the Staten Island Supreme Court. The prosecution insisted that the sole motive for the brutal crime was the defendant's jealousy and anger over suspicions of Rebecca Cutler's infidelity.
But I will tell you why that man killed Rebecca Cutler. And it got to the boiling point for him when he took that oath. That is why he killed. He said that man sitting right over there, that loving, caring, doting father, is guilty of all the crimes charged in this case.
Prosecutors provided irrefutable evidence of Sykes' guilt. Surveillance camera footage, witness testimony, fingerprints and DNA on the murder weapon, and a history of internet search queries about ways to conceal evidence of a crime. Several of his acquaintances testified in court about Sykes's repeated complaints about his girlfriend's infidelity. Meanwhile, Sykes's lawyers insisted on his innocence in the murder of the children and asked the jury to consider the attack on Cutler as self-defense. They appealed to the absence of eyewitnesses and called the evidence against their client circumstantial and ambiguous. However, the prosecutor's most compelling evidence was the victims' bodies themselves, with dozens of stab wounds that eloquently testified to the attacker's frenzied rage and cruelty. In November 2017, the jury found Michael Sykes guilty of second-degree murder of Rebecca Cutler. However, regarding the murder of her children, they could not reach an agreement. The judge scheduled a retrial of these episodes for the fall of 2018. Sykes was sentenced to 25 years in prison for Cutler's murder and sent to prison to await a new trial. During the second trial in the fall of 2018, the prosecution presented new evidence and testimony that convincingly proved Sykes's guilt in the murder of Ziana and Malia Cutler and the attempted murder of Miracle. Forensic experts confirmed that the defendant's fingerprints and DNA were found not only on Rebecca's body, but also on the girl's bloodied clothing. Moreover, it was revealed that a few days before the tragedy, Sykes had visited a shelter for victims of domestic violence and told employees about his desire to take revenge on his ex-girlfriend for her infidelity. This time, the defense's main argument about Sykes's non-involvement in the attack on the children did not convince the jury. They unanimously found him guilty on all counts: first-degree intentional murder of 1-year-old Ziana and 4-month-old Malia, and attempted first-degree murder of 2-year-old Miracle. District Attorney Michael McMahon hailed this decision as a triumph of justice. Today, we finally put an end to this horrific case.
And since, Mr. Sykes, you couldn't be with her, you wouldn't be with the children. And like so many other spiteful people in this world, you decided that if you couldn't have her, nobody would have her. If you couldn't have the children, nobody would have the children. It was callous, brutal, and inhumane. And even those words can't begin to describe the carnage, death, and destruction you caused.
Michael Sykes will face the punishment he deserves for his inhuman crimes and will never be able to harm another child again, he said after the verdict was announced. On December 14, 2018, the final hearing in the Sykes case took place, at which Judge William Garnett pronounced the sentence. Given the extreme cruelty, audacity, and cynicism of the crimes, the court sentenced him to 2 life terms for the murders of Ziana and Malia, and an additional 25 years for the attempted murder of Miracle. All terms were to be served consecutively. Thus, Sykes was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The victims' relatives greeted the verdict with loud applause. Finally, this monster got what he deserved, but will it bring back my girls? They were so tiny, so defenseless. May he burn in hell forever, exclaimed Rebecca Cutler's mother through tears. The chilling murder of Rebecca Cutler and her young daughters Ziana and Malia, and the brutal attack on 2-year-old Miracle at the hotel shelter on Staten Island in February 2016 became one of the most tragic and high-profile criminal cases in New York history. This horrific event shook the entire country, prompting a discussion about the systemic problems that made such an outburst of violence possible. The tragedy of the Cutler family vividly highlighted the numerous challenges faced by homeless families in America. Living in unsuitable hotel rooms, lacking proper social support and protection, and constantly being under stressful conditions, all of this creates a dangerous breeding ground for conflicts and aggression. Authorities and communities must learn from this case and make every effort to ensure decent and safe conditions for the temporary housing of families in need. The story of Rebecca and Michael is also a cautionary tale about the destructive power of jealousy, anger, and domestic violence. Sykes's pathological obsession with his girlfriend, constant suspicions of infidelity, and monitoring of her every move ultimately erupted in a horrific attack on the entire family. This case should serve as a reminder to all of us about the importance of timely response to alarming signals in relationships, the need for psychological assistance to troubled couples, and the obligation of the state and society to protect victims of domestic terror. the legal aspects of the case cannot be overlooked either. The nearly 2-year trial of Michael Sykes demonstrated how difficult it can be to prove the guilt of a suspect in committing such brutal and unthinkable crimes. Even despite the obviousness of the evidence against the killer, the first jury failed to reach an agreement on his responsibility for the attack on the children. Only thanks to the perseverance and professionalism of the prosecutors in the retrial did Sykes finally receive a life sentence on all counts. This experience testifies to the need to improve the American judicial system so that even the most audacious and cruel criminals cannot escape just punishment. However, the most important lesson of this drama is not related to the actions of the state or the sentence of the criminal. At the heart of this story is the fate of specific people whose lives were ruined or forever changed by horrific violence. A mother with 3 young daughters who were simply trying to survive in difficult circumstances. A young man with a hard childhood and bad inclinations, unable to cope with his demons. Relatives, friends, and the Staten Island community who will bear the burden of loss and suffering because of this tragedy. But amid the pain and grief, there is also a light of hope. Little Miracle, who survived by a miracle and became a symbol of the indomitable human spirit. The Michael Sykes case is not just a criminal story. It is a warning, a challenge, and a call to action for each of us. We must cherish and support one another, especially the most vulnerable. We must be attentive to the pain of others and be able to extend a helping hand in time. We must tirelessly eradicate all manifestations of violence, cruelty, and indifference from our lives and the life of society. Only then will Miracle and thousands of other victims be able to heal from their traumas and find a better life. This is the most important conclusion that we all must draw from this tragic but instructive story. At the site of the tragedy, the Ramada Inn on Staten Island, caring citizens created an improvised memorial. They leave toys, flowers, candles, and children's drawings there, in memory of the victims and in solidarity with all victims of violence. And the portraits of the smiling Rebecca with her daughters have circled the globe and become one of the most famous and poignant images of this terrible cautionary tale. Traditionally, thank you for watching, and remind you that it would be great if you support the video by liking and subscribing to the channel. It's always interesting and sometimes even creepy. Hey everyone, dear friends. This is Drake on the Crime Story Diaries channel. Today we'll be examining a disturbing case, so I invite you to watch the video. Don't forget to leave your comments and likes. A 14-year-old schoolgirl went on a date with her boyfriend, but never returned home. The worried mother immediately contacted the police, and a few hours later, the girl's naked body was discovered in a forest thicket. Almost immediately, the investigators had a prime suspect who gave himself away by his actions. However, the shocking details that emerged during the investigation stunned even seasoned detectives. This case became the longest trial of the 2000s in Scotland. Jodi Jones was born in 1989 in the small Scottish village of Easthouses. Her parents, James and Judith, worked at the local branch of the Royal Mail and raised 3 children, with Jodi being the youngest. From an early age, the girl was known for her intelligence, composure, and great ambitions. She had a clear talent for drawing and writing poetry, and the school principal predicted a brilliant and successful future for Jodi. Perhaps everything would have turned out that way if not for a sudden tragedy that forever changed the lives of the Jones family. When Jodi was just 9 years old, her father, who had long struggled with mental health issues, decided to voluntarily take his own life. This event dealt a crushing blow to the entire family. The mother had to quit her job to take care of the 3 children. The eldest daughter, Janine, took the loss especially hard, and at one point, it was decided to send her to her grandmother's for a while. For little Jodi, this was yet another blow, as her sister was her closest person, the only one she trusted with her innermost secrets and who truly understood her. This feeling was mutual. Mom jokingly called Jodi a little mentor, and although Janine eventually returned home, the upheavals Jodi experienced did not pass without a trace. As she grew older, her personality and appearance changed rapidly. The girl entered a rebellious phase. She dyed her hair in flashy colors, started listening to punk and metal, and by the age of 14, she became addicted to marijuana and alcohol. In the early 2000s, the goth movement was gaining popularity among teenagers. Gloomy young men and women immersed in melancholy, dressed in black, and fascinated by themes of tragedy and death. For a child going through the loss of a father, this subculture seemed very appealing. Moreover, Jodi began to self-harm. It's not surprising that it was in this environment that she met a kindred spirit, a young man who completely shared her interests and understood her like no one else. Luke Mitchell was born on July 24, 1988, was a year older than Jodi in school, and was also the youngest child in the family. However, unlike his girlfriend, he seemed to have no apparent reasons for such behavior. His parents divorced when the boy was 11, but his mother successfully coped with raising 2 children, providing them with quite comfortable living conditions. Mitchell attended a Catholic school and was known as a well-mannered and always elegantly dressed young man. He was interested in military history, horseback riding, and motorcycles, a typical middle-class representative. However, at the age of 13, inexplicable metamorphoses began to happen to him. Luke started experimenting with his appearance and drastically changing his worldview. He grew his hair long, completely updated his wardrobe, giving preference to black clothing, with a long, dark coat becoming an invariable attribute. Luke became passionate about heavy metal and rock, as well as Satanism and everything connected with it. His idol was the shocking musician Marilyn Manson, whose work still causes a lot of controversy to this day. The change in image was accompanied by a decline in academic performance, constant fights, and other problems at school, as well as drug abuse. Luke smoked marijuana several times a day for a whole year, both during and after school. Another integral feature of his new image was gloomy musings and intimidating classmates with scary stories, sometimes turning into direct threats. Once he told a classmate that he wanted to get high and kill someone, then pulled out a knife and added that he knew the best way to cut someone's throat. Unfortunately, the interlocutor did not take these words seriously enough. The changes in Luke did not go unnoticed by the teachers. In his school essays, he increasingly wrote about violence and worshiping Satan. In one of them, the young man doubted the existence of God and declared that people need Satan for balance. In addition, the teenagers' textbooks and notebooks were filled with brutal drawings depicting satanic symbols and the like. A concerned teacher turned to the school psychologist for help, obviously to no avail, because in the next paper, Luke wrote that they were imposing some psychopath teacher on him, sending him to a psychiatrist just for being tougher and harsher than the rest. At the same time, the guy emphasized that the decision to follow the teachings of Satan does not at all imply the need for psychiatric intervention. In early 2003, 2 tortured hearts finally found each other. Luke Mitchell and Jodi Jones started dating. For the girl, this relationship clearly meant much more. Luke became her first love, her first boyfriend, and soon, her first sexual experience. Somewhere in late spring or early summer, Jodi wrote in her personal diary that her feelings for Luke were not just a teenage crush, but true love. She confessed that she would die for him if he asked, emphasized his tenderness and how he comforts her when she cries, noted her willingness to believe everything he says. That's how the young girl described her emotions. However, Luke Mitchell did not feel anything of the kind. In the same period, he was seeing another girl. And believe me, she was about to experience something far more terrible than the exposure of infidelity. In early 2003, Jodi's mother found out that her daughter was using drugs and forbade her to meet with friends, especially with the guy whom she had also been hiding from the family for several months. Only Jodi's sister Janine knew about Luke's existence in the girl's life, and it was she who eventually told her mother everything. House arrest ended on June 30th, and Jodi, of course, arranged to meet with her beloved, sending him a message. Their special place was Roan's Way, a path through a wooded area connecting the girl's house with Luke's dwelling. Around 5 in the evening, Jodi announced that she was going on a date and rushed out the door. Despite the end of the punishment, the mother set a curfew for her daughter. When the appointed time came and the girl did not show up, Judith Jones called Luke Mitchell. He stated that they had not met. and that he had not seen Jody that evening. This news greatly puzzled the woman because her daughter had specifically asked permission to go on a date and seemingly had no other plans. Then the mother said that the family was going to search, and Mitchell immediately volunteered to help. He took his dog and arrived at the Joneses' house. Around 10 in the evening, family members, Luke Mitchell, and several volunteers were combing the vicinity of East houses, including the very path Jody was supposed to take to the meeting. Roan's Way was the shortest route from New Battle, where Luke lived, to Jody's house, and was perfect for secret rendezvous as it was hidden from prying eyes. On one side, it was bordered by a high stone wall, on the other, by a forest with cliffs. Once there, Luke Mitchell headed without hesitation to a gap in the wall at the far end of the path on the New Battle side. He climbed over to the other side and, not at all surprised, announced to the others that Jody had been found, and she was dead. The clock showed only 22:30. The search party members froze in shock, and the Jones family plunged into frenzied grief. Even in such a terrible state, they did not immediately notice how quickly and confidently Luke Mitchell discovered the girl's body. It seemed he had hidden it there himself. However, the young man claimed that it was the dog that led him to the gap. According to experts, the injuries found on Jody Jones's body indicated a personal motive for the crime. The brutality and multiplicity of the injuries testified to the attacker's extreme rage, a real outburst of anger. Perhaps a quarrel broke out between the young people, which turned into a fight. The autopsy revealed numerous stab wounds, bruises, and signs of strangulation. It is assumed that during the altercation, the perpetrator struck Jody in the face several times and then began to strangle her. Losing her balance, the girl sank to her knees. Then the killer grabbed her by the hair and slit her carotid artery with a knife, which caused her death. But that was not enough for him. After removing the victim's clothes and tying up the body, he inflicted multiple stab wounds. Within 10 days of the murder, the police interviewed about 1,500 people and searched about 250 homes and businesses. Not a single building in East Houses and New Battle was left uninspected. And even despite such large-scale measures, no one aroused as many questions and suspicions among the investigators as 14-year-old Luke Mitchell. Shortly before the tragedy, the police received information about a possible motive for the crime. Another girl admitted that she considered herself Luke's girlfriend and was unaware of Jody's existence until she heard about their relationship on the news. Detectives speculated that Jody might have found out about the cheating, which provoked a conflict. As a result, Luke lost his composure and brutally dealt with his girlfriend. This was also indicated by a find not far from the crime scene. The lover's initials were carved on a tree. 2 months after the start of the investigation, Luke Mitchell was suspended from school after refusing to be isolated from other students. He was interrogated as a witness, but the young man stubbornly stuck to his story. As an alibi, he stated that he was cooking dinner at home, which was confirmed by his mother and older brother. By the way, Luke's mother played a very significant role in this investigation. Some witnesses claimed that Corinne's relationship with her son was unhealthy. The guy often slept in her bedroom. She also did not react in any way to Luke's addiction to marijuana and generally indulged all his unhealthy whims. For example, at the age of 14, he was actively involved in Satanism, constantly watched horror movies, had a collection of porn magazines, was interested in stories about terrible murders, and listened to heavy metal and rock. On his school textbooks, inscriptions were found: "Hail Satan, Lord of Hell, and I offer my flesh, blood, and soul to the dark ruler of hell." During the investigation, it turned out that the knife Luke always carried with him suddenly disappeared immediately after the murder. Only a sheath from it was found in the house, with the initials of Jody Jones, the dates of her birth and death, 1989 to 2003, as well as a quote from the vocalist of her favorite band, Nirvana. "The worst day I ever had was the one when tomorrow never came." In addition, Luke's long coat, in which he was seen shortly before the murder and on the day of the tragedy, mysteriously disappeared. The Mitchells' neighbor said that on the evening of June 30th, Corinne was burning something in the backyard of the house. During interrogation, the woman stated that it was dry grass. For a long time, she denied that such a thing had ever existed in her son's wardrobe. And then she bought him a new, exactly the same coat, continuing to insist that the previous one did not exist. Luke himself could not clearly explain the disappearance of these items, and 5 months later, for Christmas, he received a new knife as a gift from his mother. Additional suspicions were raised by the moment Jody's body was discovered. None of those present that evening on Roan's Way could recall seeing strange behavior from Luke's dog or hearing it bark. On the contrary, it seemed that Luke knew exactly where the body was hidden and purposefully went there. Moreover, even in summer at 22:30, especially in the forest, pitch darkness reigns, and the young man, upon seeing the body, did not doubt for a moment that it was Jody in front of him, not to mention the monstrous injuries that made identification difficult. At the first interrogation, the guy said that he recognized her by her red hair. However, the others denied that it was visible. Thus, in 2004, Luke Mitchell was officially charged with the murder of his 14-year-old girlfriend, Jody Jones. At the preliminary stage, and to this day, he does not admit his guilt and continues to insist that he was at home. The prosecution presented a number of strong pieces of evidence in court that one way or another discredited Mitchell's alibi and pointed to his involvement. For example, 2 witnesses claimed that they saw Luke and Jody together around 1650 on the day of the murder, and 50 minutes later, he appeared in New Battle alone. Records of his phone conversations showed that at 1654 he called the speaking clock service. When asked by the detective why Luke did not just look at the wall clock at home if he was cooking dinner at that moment, the young man did not know what to answer. There was also no reasonable explanation as to why Luke did not look for Jody if she did not come to the agreed meeting. The guy simply said that she probably did not feel like it, and that evening she was with him. The prosecution had a strong counter-argument. Jody was very much in love with Luke Mitchell and met with him several times a day when the opportunity arose. The girl lied to her family and ran away from home for the sake of dates with him. And that evening, when her mother had just lifted all the restrictions, she was unlikely to go to anyone else. The position and condition of the girl's body at the time of discovery indicated that she had independently crossed to the other side of the wall, which automatically proved that she trusted the person she was going to. Luke's own brother became almost a key witness at the trial. It turned out that during the first interrogation, he gave false testimony, supporting his mother's version that Luke was at home cooking dinner. However, later, when examining his computer, it was discovered that during the time period when the murder occurred, Luke's brother was watching porn at home. When asked about this, the young man changed his testimony, stating that if someone else had been in the house at that time, he definitely would not have watched adult movies. During cross-examination, these words were used as confirmation that neither Luke nor his mother were at home at that moment. Later, Corinne was even charged with giving false testimony. In addition, the team of prosecutors tried to discredit her as a witness, referring to the case when Corinne lied in a tattoo salon that Luke had already turned 18 so that he could get tattoos in half a month. This happened in October 2003, that is, after the murder. The prosecution convinced the jury that this woman would do anything to please her son, so her testimony could not be trusted. During the trial, other details also surfaced. Luke Mitchell claimed that he had not communicated with another girl for months before Jody's murder. However, phone call records showed that they had been in contact 79 times over a long period, including just 2 hours after Luke's last intimate contact with Jody 2 days before the tragedy. Moreover, immediately after the murder, he was going to go on a 2-week trip with his mistress. Another piece of evidence against Luke was his admission in court that he had smoked so much marijuana over the course of a year that sometimes he would smoke almost a pack a week. Jody's classmates said that they saw them together during the lunch break on the day of the murder, and they were also smoking. A court psychologist noted that Luke Mitchell was quick-tempered, aggressive, and unable to control himself. The only thing that surprised those present was the fact that his mother confirmed this diagnosis. Usually, such cases also feature DNA evidence, but not in this instance. Since the teenagers were dating and had an intimate relationship, and Luke then touched the bloodied body, an agreement was reached between the parties not to use DNA evidence in court, as it was impossible to explain its origin. Experts examined more than 120 items at the crime scene and did not find a single sample that would confirm or refute Mitchell's guilt. However, a used condom was found in front of the wall, and although the DNA found on it belonged to another man, there were no foreign traces on the girl's body, so this evidence was also excluded from the case. Despite all the arguments of the defense, the evidence presented was enough for the jury to deliver a guilty verdict on January 21, 2005. Even an attempt to bring them to the place where the body was found, where Mitchell's lawyers tried to show that it was the dog that led him to the corpse, did not help. After a 5-hour discussion, Luke was found guilty of murder and selling marijuana. Upon hearing the court's decision, he showed no emotion. Later, he was sentenced to life imprisonment with the right to parole after 20 years. Luke Mitchell began serving his sentence in an institution for juvenile offenders in Polmont, and then was transferred to Greenock Prison. Until 2021, he filed numerous appeals, but none of them were successful. The lawyers managed to attract media attention and gain the sympathy of a part of society that believes he was convicted without sufficient evidence. They also violated his rights during the first interrogation, since he was 14 and the police spoke with him without a lawyer present. In 2019, a therapist named Sandra Lean even organized a fundraiser in support of Luke Mitchell, urging people to open their eyes to the lies and restore justice for Jody and Luke. Later, the family of the deceased girl publicly criticized her, stating that they had always been sure that the police had convicted the right person. Be that as it may, so far no attempts to mitigate the sentence have brought Luke Mitchell closer to release. And in June 2023, he failed a standardized drug test, thus delaying his parole application until at least 2026. In my opinion, as long as the family of the murdered child is alive, he's unlikely to get out of prison. What do you think? Did the prosecution present enough evidence? And did they do justice to a 14-year-old? I look forward to hearing your thoughts in the comments. Traditionally, thank you for watching and remind you that it would be great if you support the video by liking and subscribing to the channel. It's always interesting and sometimes even creepy. Hey everyone, dear friends, this is Drake on the Crime Story Diaries channel. Today we'll be examining a disturbing case, so I invite you to watch the video. Don't forget to leave your comments and likes. Carly Brucia disappeared without a trace as soon as she left her friend's house. Police immediately started searching, but the girl seemed to have vanished into thin air. The next day, detectives requested surveillance camera footage, and what they saw shocked them. Carly was born on March 16, 1992 in Sarasota, Florida, USA. When she was little, her parents divorced, and the girl stayed with her mother. Carly's father moved to New York, but despite the distance, they constantly kept in touch, and the girl visited him almost every weekend and holiday. Carly's mother remarried, and her new husband became a stepfather to the girl. Carly also had a younger brother with whom she had a very close relationship. The girl was known for her positive attitude, cheerfulness, and a large number of friends. On January 31, 2004, when Carly was 11, she stayed overnight at her friend's house. The girls had a great time, and the next day, on Sunday, Carly was about to head home. That evening, the championship final of American football was going to be broadcast, which she wanted to watch together with her family. Usually, Carly was given a ride by her mother or stepfather, but that evening, they were both busy, so the girl decided to walk. It was still light outside, and her house was a little over a kilometer away. Carly left her friend's place around 6:15 p.m. after telling her friend's parents that her mother allowed her to go alone. But when the girl left, the woman decided to double-check and called Carly's mother. However, she replied that she had not given such permission. Then she asked her husband Stephen to drive there and pick up the girl halfway. He got into the car and drove down the road that led to their house. However, Carly was nowhere to be seen. Stephen circled the area several times but still could not find the girl. He informed his wife about this, and she became seriously worried. The path from Carly's friend's house to theirs was almost straight, so it was unlikely that the girl could have taken another route. The woman called all of Carly's friends who lived nearby, assuming that she might have stopped by someone else's place. But no one had seen the girl that evening. After waiting a little longer, hoping that Carly would still return home, around 7:30 p.m., her mother decided to contact the police. Law enforcement immediately began searching, focusing on the girl's route. They interviewed employees of stores and cafes, knocked on the doors of houses, trying to find at least someone who might have seen her. The police thoroughly searched every nook and cranny, including the local park, but Carly was nowhere to be found. The search lasted all night. Officers found that none of her friends or acquaintances had seen the girl that evening, and they could not find a single witness. The police's suspicion immediately fell on Carly's stepfather. He should have been on the same street as the girl and theoretically could have kidnapped her. However, the man assured that he called his wife almost immediately after arriving and was in contact with her the entire time while searching for Carly. The woman confirmed his words, so the investigators doubted the stepfather's involvement. During a conversation with the police, Stephen mentioned an interesting detail. When he was driving down the street looking for the girl, he noticed a red pickup truck several times, which was also going back and forth along that stretch of road. And when he arrived at the house of Carly's friend, he saw the same vehicle. As it turned out, it belonged to the stepfather of this friend, named Ron. The detectives wondered if he might be involved in the girl's disappearance, and soon received another compelling reason for suspicion. The next morning, they brought search dogs to the site. After letting them sniff Carly's belongings, the dogs picked up her scent along the road from her friend's house. But then something strange happened. The dogs led the detectives to a car wash located almost halfway down the path. The girl's trail ended at the edge of the parking lot. The police assumed that Carly could have passed through the car wash to take a shortcut home via a private road. But the fact that the dogs lost her scent behind the car wash made the detectives think alarming thoughts. They surrounded the area and started looking for possible leads. The owner of the car wash reported that he had cameras with motion sensors and provided the police with the footage from the previous day. And here, the detectives saw something truly horrifying. One of the cameras behind the car wash captured Carly walking by at 6:21 p.m. Everything seemed normal until suddenly a man came out towards the girl. He approached her and immediately grabbed her hand. It appeared that he was saying something to her for a few seconds and then led her out of the camera's view. These frames shocked the investigators. They realized that with a high probability, the camera had recorded the moment of the girl's abduction. The detectives also assumed that the stranger could have used threats to force Carly to go with him. The recording shows him putting his hand in his pocket, possibly threatening her with some kind of weapon in case she tried to escape. The primary task of the police was to establish the identity of this man, and here they remembered Ron, the stepfather of Carly's friend with the red pickup truck. Despite the poor quality of the camera recording, they concluded that he resembled the stranger. Moreover, Stephen had mentioned that the pickup truck had entered the car wash territory, which gave additional grounds for suspicion. Ron was called in for questioning, but he denied any involvement. The man said that when Carly's mother started to worry, he also decided to join the search. He and his wife were concerned that the girl had left their house without her mother's permission and wanted to help find her. As for the camera footage, Ron claimed that at 6:21 p.m. he had not yet left work. The police interviewed his colleagues, and everyone confirmed that the man had indeed left later. The detectives asked for permission to search his van, and Ron agreed. They found no traces of the girl's presence there, so they concluded that the man was telling the truth. So the investigators had to return to square one and make every effort to identify the man from the video. They immediately noticed his clothing, which looked like a work uniform, and something like a badge or patch on his chest. Experts tried to improve the quality of the recording to read the inscription, but to no avail. All they managed to find out was the assumption that the badge had a 3-letter name. In addition, tattoos were visible on the man's body, but their pattern could not be discerned due to the low image quality either. The detectives sent these frames to TV channels and newspapers, hoping that someone would recognize the man. Within a few hours, the footage had spread throughout the city, and hundreds of calls began coming into the police. People reported acquaintances who resembled the suspect, and the detectives recorded every lead. The situation was complicated by the inability to clearly see the man's face due to the poor quality of the recording. So many people shared their guesses, although the vast majority were not entirely sure. Almost a day passed like this, until on the morning of February 3rd, the detectives paid attention to one specific call. A man named Ed reported that he was 100% certain that the person in the footage was his former colleague Joseph Smith. He recognized him by his gait, build, hairstyle, and clothing. Smith worked as a car mechanic. The police immediately began gathering information about this man. 37-year-old Joseph had 3 children, but did not live with them due to his divorce from his wife. He also had an extensive criminal history, more than 10 arrests on various charges, from possession of prohibited substances to kidnapping and unlawful imprisonment. At the time of the incident, Smith was on probation, and a year earlier, he had violated the conditions of his early release twice, but was not sent back behind bars for some reason. The police also learned that Smith owned a brown Lincoln car and decided to review the surveillance camera footage again. However, his car was not spotted in the area of the girl's abduction. Instead, their attention was drawn to another vehicle that had come to that place several times. A light-colored Buick entered the car wash parking lot just 3 minutes before Carly's kidnapping. Unfortunately, due to the image quality, the investigators could not discern any important details. Despite the fact that Smith's car had not been noticed in that area, the police still decided to check him out. The man was renting a room in the house of an elderly couple, where the detectives went. At first, they watched the house and found out that the owners were not there, and Smith was in his room. But when they knocked on the door, no one answered. The police called the officer responsible for Joseph's early release and waited. After about 45 minutes, Smith's sister arrived at the house and brought her brother out to the detectives. The man declared his non-involvement in the kidnapping and said that on that day, he was far from that area. When shown the surveillance camera footage, Smith admitted that the person in the photo did indeed resemble him, but it was not him. He also allowed the investigators to inspect his room and car without a warrant. In the room, they found several sets of gray mechanics workwear, similar to the one worn by the abductor. The patch also had an abbreviated 3-letter name, Joe. As we remember, the experts assumed that the kidnapper also had a 3-letter name on his chest. However, despite this, no significant material evidence was found in the room. While the police were searching the house, the landlady returned. She reported that the man was indeed at home around 6:30 p.m. because he used the landline phone to talk to his ex-wife. Therefore, Joseph had a reliable alibi. However, during the search of his car, the police found 2 spoons, probably used for heating prohibited substances. Since this was a violation of the conditions of his early release, Smith was arrested and taken to the police station. After that, the detectives began considering other possible suspects, but that same evening, something unexpected happened. The husband of the landlady where Joseph was renting a room came to the police station. He reported that his wife had memory problems and unintentionally provided the police with false information. In reality, on the day of the kidnapping, Smith left the house around 3 p.m. and returned at 7 a.m. the next morning. It is noteworthy that he was wearing a mechanic's work uniform at that time. It turned out that Joseph not only lacked an alibi for the time of the abduction, but also lied to the police about being at home. But the most interesting part was yet to come. Before leaving the house, Smith borrowed the owner's car, the same light-colored Buick that had entered the car wash parking lot 3 minutes before the kidnapping. The homeowner added that when Joseph returned the car, there was complete chaos inside. The man had moved the seats, rearranged things, but did not explain why he had done it. Given all these facts, Joseph instantly became the prime suspect, and the police took him in for questioning. However, he refused to talk without a lawyer, so the investigators sent him back to prison for violating the conditions of his early release. The next day, his brother John came to the police station, and here, the detectives were in for something interesting. The man said that in recent years he and his brother had hardly communicated, but on the evening of February 1st, Joseph called him. John refused to talk, but a few hours later, Joseph came to his house. Obviously, he was under the influence of some potent substances, so his brother kicked him out. Later, after seeing the abduction footage on the news, John immediately realized that it was his brother. The detectives asked John to help obtain a confession, and he agreed. He visited his brother in prison together with his mother, where they talked for about an hour and a half. But when John came out, he reported that Joseph had not confessed. He continued to insist on his non-involvement in the crime. The detectives suspected that the brother and mother might be hiding something from them. After all, John said that he recognized his brother in the video from the news, but shared this information with the police only a few days later. Eventually, the investigators decided to follow John, which soon yielded results. Apparently, he noticed the surveillance and decided that the detectives were tapping his phone, although in reality, they were not doing this. The very next evening, John himself called the police and reported that his brother had indeed confessed to him and his mother about the kidnapping. Joseph said that he was not sure if he had killed the girl, but this scenario seemed the most likely. The brother managed to persuade him to tell where he had left Carly, and Joseph said that he had dumped her near a small church. John and his mother went there but found nothing. They hoped until the very end that their relative was not actually involved, so they decided to make sure first before telling the investigators. The police immediately went to that church and found Carly's body in the trees nearby. She was partially undressed, and it was evident that the victim had been dead for several days. Meanwhile, the detectives listened to everything that John's brother had told him in prison. According to the suspect, on that day he had taken prohibited substances, and then everything was like in a fog. He admitted that he had kidnapped the girl, raped her in the car, and then probably strangled her. Medical experts confirmed that the victim's death was caused by strangulation. In parallel, forensic experts were examining the material evidence. In the Buick that Joseph had borrowed from the homeowner, they found several of Carly's hairs, as well as 7 fabric particles that matched the material of the tank top the girl was wearing that evening. In addition, traces of sperm were found on this tank top, and DNA analysis showed that it belonged to Joseph Smith. This evidence was more than enough to charge him with murder. However, despite the confession to his brother and mother, the man once again declared his innocence, and the case was sent to court. The trial began in November 2005, almost 2 years after the murder. The defense was unable to provide any evidence in favor of their client's innocence, while the prosecution had plenty of evidence. Footage from cameras, lies about the alibi, DNA on the victim's body, and the fact that he indicated the place where he left the body undeniably proved his guilt. The trial did not last long, and Joseph Smith was found guilty. On March 15, 2006, he was sentenced to life imprisonment for kidnapping and rape, and for Carly's murder, he received the death penalty. Since then, Joseph Smith had been on death row, awaiting the execution of the sentence. But 13 years later, in July 2017, the death sentence was overturned. The reason was a new law, according to which such a punishment is possible only with the unanimous decision of the jury. In Joseph's case, 10 out of 12 jurors voted for the death penalty. The man remained to serve his life sentence, but already in April 2020, the court reconsidered the cancellation of the sentence and restored the death penalty. But Joseph did not live to see its execution. On July 26, 2021, he died in prison at the age of 55. Despite his death, questions still remain in the Joseph Smith case. After his conviction, The detective suggested that he might be involved in other murders as well. While studying this issue, they concluded that he had most likely killed a young girl in 2000, whose murder remained unsolved. Even Joseph's brother expressed suspicion about his involvement in this crime. Perhaps someday the police will be able to find evidence that will link him to that case. But for now, it remains unsolved. Share your thoughts about this story in the comments, and don't forget to like this video if you enjoyed it. Hey, dear friends. This is Drake on the Crime Story Diaries channel. Today we're going to look at a disturbing case, so let's dive into the video. Don't forget to leave your comments and likes. Chapter 1. The Prelude to a Tragedy. The horrific murder that shocked all of Canada happened by sheer chance, triggered by the pathological lies of a criminal who got tangled in a web of his own deceit. Brett Ryan was born in 1980 in Toronto into a large, close-knit family. Besides him, the Ryan couple had 3 more sons, older Christopher and Leland and younger AJ. The parents, who advocated for a healthy lifestyle, tried to instill the right values in their children. The head of the family worked at a newspaper and moonlighted as a fitness coach in his spare time. The mother devoted herself to housekeeping and growing flowers, which was her passion. The woman had to be strict, sometimes even harsh in raising 4 boys, while the father was known for his gentleness and restraint. Each of the sons followed his own path in life. Chris worked as a conductor and was very modest. Leland found his calling in photography and music, and Brett was always described as a gregarious, cheerful guy. Chapter 2. Brett's Academic and Financial Woes. After finishing school, Brett enrolled at the University of Toronto but quickly encountered difficulties with his studies. The young man went through 2 painful breakups with girls, after which he couldn't focus at all on preparing for exams and eventually dropped out of college. He watched with envy as his friends and classmates built relationships, got married, and achieved success, while he couldn't get anything right. This bred a sense of failure in Brett. After getting a job as a painter, the guy realized this wasn't for him. At the same time, Brett loved himself, strived to look good, and spent a lot of money on his own needs and on girls. Because of this, he accumulated a large debt, 60,000 Canadian dollars, which he had no way to repay. Creditors started demanding their money back, which plunged Brett into a deep depression. The young man felt like a total loser, but never confessed his problems to anyone. Chapter 3. Brett's Bank Robbery Plan. Desperately trying to find a way out of his predicament and quickly get his hands on a large sum of money, Brett resolved to rob a bank. On October 20th, 2007, he set his plan in motion. The guy chose a financial institution not far from his house. To disguise himself, he wrapped his face in bandages and faked an injury to his left arm. Pretending to limp and carrying a stack of papers, Brett entered the bank posing as a sick man. Approaching the teller, he handed the cashier a note demanding money and threatening that he had a weapon hidden in his bandages. The frightened employee quickly gave the robber all the cash from the register, but it turned out to be just a little over $1,000. Although Brett wasn't happy with this amount, he decided not to draw extra attention, swiftly grabbed the money, and vanished from the crime scene. Despite the security cameras recording the robbery, Brett managed to avoid arrest. Feeling a sense of impunity, he continued robbing banks, but in other parts of the city. Changing his disguise tactics to a hat and a fake beard, the young man became more cautious. In total, Brett robbed 12 banks, netting over $28,000 in loot. Chapter 4. The Unmasking and Imprisonment of the Robber. Eventually, the police managed to track down the brazen robber, and on June 20th, 2008, 28-year-old Brett was arrested during an attempted robbery. The guy's family was in deep shock, as Brett had once volunteered at a children's hospital and had now turned into a criminal. The court sentenced him to 5 years in prison. While serving his sentence, experts evaluated the convict's mental state and found no signs of aggression or propensity for violence. Throughout his time, Brett never used prohibited substances and had no mental disorders. Moreover, Due to his exemplary behavior, he was granted parole after 2 years. The prison staff were simply charmed by this pleasant, charismatic, and hard-working young man. In their opinion, he had just made a fatal mistake due to the burden of debt and deserved a second chance. Brett's profile stated that he was a model prisoner with minimal risk of reoffending. Chapter 5. Brett's attempts to start a new life. According to the terms of his parole, Brett had to undergo a course of psychotherapy and report any problems he encountered in his family relationships, with girls, or at work. After all, these were the factors that could trigger him to relapse. But despite his sincere intentions to start a new life, reality proved to be much more complicated. The debts didn't go away, and there was no way to pay them off. Finding a job with a criminal record turned out to be extremely difficult. No one wanted to hire an ex-convict even as a painter. In desperation, Brett declared bankruptcy. His parents came to the rescue, supporting their son financially. This allowed him to resume his studies at the university, but this time in the information technology department. Brett also continued to visit a psychotherapist by court order and diligently tried to put his life back together. It was during therapy that he was advised to be more honest and open with those around him. Chapter 6. Brett and Kristen's fateful meeting. One day in September 2011, Brett's friend set him up on a blind date with a pretty girl named Kristen Baxter. She worked as a physiotherapist, lived in her own apartment with her little dog, and loved to travel. A spark instantly ignited between Brett and Kristen. They immediately hit it off and felt a mutual attraction. The young people were united by common interests. Brett, like Kristen, adored animals and travel. Soon they started dating. The couple spent a lot of time together, attended sports events, and went on hikes. Brett even accompanied Kristen and her family on a vacation to the Bahamas. Plus, the girl's dog immediately took a liking to him. It seemed that Brett's life was finally getting back on track, and he was no longer drawn to dubious ventures. He longed for a quiet and cozy life next to his beloved girlfriend. In January 2013, Brett moved into Kristen's apartment, marking a new stage in their relationship. The couple began to think about getting married. Chapter 7. Hiding the truth from his beloved. A new life began for Brett. The young man who had grown up in a quiet suburb was now immersed in the bustle of vibrant city life with its numerous restaurants, shops, and interesting places. The young couple enjoyed visiting cozy eateries together and taking evening swims in the pool. However, as it turned out, all this time, while Brett's brothers were building their careers and becoming independent, he was only studying, living on his parents' money. The couple often traveled to warm countries together. Brett's father suddenly passed away. The young man temporarily moved in with his mother to help with the funeral arrangements and support her during this difficult time. That's when he confessed to Susan that he was madly in love with Kristen and dreamed of marrying her. However, he didn't have the money for a decent engagement ring, so he hesitated with the proposal. Touched by her son's words, his mother handed him money for an expensive ring. Brett bought a luxurious diamond ring and proposed to Kristen. Beaming with happiness, the girl said yes. The couple immersed themselves in pleasant wedding preparations. Brett even looked for side jobs to be able to surprise his beloved and shower her with gifts, but these were insignificant sums. The guy had no idea how he would provide for a family in the future. He carefully concealed from his fiancée his problems with the law, bankruptcy, and debts. Abandoning his futile studies, Brett focused on finding a decent job. Chapter 8. A failed attempt to get a job. At the beginning of 2016, fortune finally smiled upon Brett. He got a good job in the field of information technology. The guy joyfully shared this news with Kristen, and the couple decided to celebrate the occasion with family. However, as soon as his new employer learned about his criminal past, they immediately refused to hire him. This was a crushing blow to Brett's ego. Not wanting to upset his beloved, he decided not to tell her about yet another failure. Instead, Brett pretended that he would be working remotely from home. While Kristen was getting ready for work, he pretended to be working at the computer. The girl was happy that they would finally get on their feet and Brett would start earning good money. she enthusiastically prepared for the wedding, scheduled for September 16th, 2016, choosing the most beautiful and expensive options, as they could now supposedly afford it. A luxurious banquet hall was booked for the ceremony. The pre-wedding bachelor party was planned to be celebrated at a posh ski resort. The couple even started looking at a spacious and cozy house where they dreamed of settling after the wedding, as they were tired of being cramped in a small apartment. Susan was overjoyed, believing that her son had finally gotten on his feet, graduated from university, and found a high-paying job. The woman eagerly anticipated the wedding and Brett's move into his own home. Chapter 9. Brett's lies exposed. But in reality, this was all a blatant lie. Brett had nothing to his name but deceit. He got so tangled up in a web of his own fabrications that he couldn't extricate himself from it. In desperate attempts to get money, the guy took any side job he could find and even helped his mother around the house for pay. He came to her every day, looking for things to fix or do around the house to receive financial rewards. Susan found her son's insistence suspicious, as he hung around her house all day long, constantly tinkering with something instead of working. If Brett was earning as well as he claimed, why did he need these odd jobs, the woman wondered. She started asking her son uncomfortable questions, which he initially tried to dodge. But then, remembering the therapist's advice about the importance of honesty, Brett finally dared to confess his troubles to his mother. He begged Susan for substantial financial assistance, promising to keep looking for work. However, his mother was extremely disappointed with her son's life failures. She was filled with indignation that Brett hadn't even managed to finish university and get an education. Susan flatly refused to give him money and threatened to tell Kristen everything. Chapter 10. The Birth of a Criminal Plan. His mother's harsh words infuriated Brett. He was seized by a panic fear that Kristen would leave him if she learned the truth. The guy was desperate to avoid this at all costs. More than anything in the world, he feared ending up on the streets again, without his beloved girlfriend and returning under his mother's care. Brett didn't want to feel like a miserable loser for the rest of his life. And then a monstrous plan took shape in his head. Since his criminal record prevented him from legally purchasing firearms, Brett decided to get a crossbow. To avoid attracting undue attention, the guy bought a used crossbow for cash. The next day, Brett went to his mother's house again, supposedly to help with repairs for money. Chapter 11. The Bloody Massacre. On August 25th, 2016, Kristen woke up early as usual and went to work to see her patients. Brett pretended to stay home and work, but in fact, he started getting ready to go to his mother's. Suddenly, it dawned on the guy. To avoid suspicion, he needed an alibi. The resourceful Brett crafted a device that imitated him working at the computer by periodically pressing keys. In addition, he set up automatic email sending at a specific time. Next, Brett packed all the necessary items for his disguise into a sports bag, including clothes and a wig. Slipping out of the house unnoticed through the fire escape to avoid being captured by surveillance cameras, the guy headed to Susan's place. Just as stealthily, in a mask and wig so that no one would recognize him, Brett arrived at his mother's house. On the doorstep, he took off all his disguise and went inside. Once again, Brett tried to talk to his mother and convince her to help him with money, but Susan was unyielding. A fierce argument broke out between them. The woman insisted that her son confess his lies to Kristen himself. Otherwise, she threatened to expose him on her own. Meanwhile, the quarrel flared up with renewed vigor. Sensing something was wrong, Susan took advantage of the moment when Brett briefly stepped out and urgently called her eldest son, Chris. She begged him to come over and help deal with the conflict with Brett. And Brett went to the garage for a reason. He had hidden a crossbow there in advance. Returning with the weapon, the guy started fiddling with it, setting everything up for the shot. This task turned out to be not so simple and took some time. Suddenly, his mother entered the garage. In a fit of blind rage, Brett grabbed the first tool he could find and struck Susan twice, hitting her cheek and ear. The woman screamed in pain, shocked that her own son had raised a hand against her. A fight broke out between them. During the scuffle, both fell to the floor and rolled around in a tangle, knocking everything down in their path. Brett groped for a long, dirty rag and, without much thought, strangled his 63-year-old mother with it. Only after committing the deed did it begin to dawn on him that everything had gone wrong. The perfect murder had turned into a nightmare. The guy suddenly remembered that Chris, summoned by his mother, was about to arrive. Upon seeing her body, his older brother would immediately realize whose handiwork this was. Without much hesitation, Brett decided to get rid of Chris as an unwanted witness. He jumped up, grabbed the crossbow, and started fiddling with it again. Now a plan to kill his brother was brewing in Brett's head. Having prepared everything for the new crime, he lurked in the garage, waiting for Chris. Soon, the unsuspecting 42-year-old man crossed the threshold in search of his mother. At that moment, Brett silently approached him from behind and shot him point-blank in the back of the head. Chris instantly fell dead. Brett dragged his bloodied body over to his mother's corpse and covered them with a tarp. The guy rushed to grab his bag of clothes to quickly change and flee. Unexpectedly, Brett's younger brother, 29-year-old AJ, appeared at the doorstep of his mother's house, coming for a visit. For Brett, this was a real catastrophe. He frantically pondered what to do next: change clothes and run, or stay and kill AJ too. Brett feared that his younger brother, upon discovering the bodies, would immediately call the police, and then he would certainly be caught. This pushed the guy to commit yet another gruesome murder. After tracking down AJ, Brett followed him, holding the crossbow at the ready. He crept up to his unsuspecting victim with the intention of cunningly shooting him in the back of the head, just like Chris. But this time, something went wrong. AJ sensed danger and noticed the armed Brett. A life-and-death fight broke out between the brothers. At some point, Brett managed to wound AJ, hitting him in the neck with the crossbow. AJ screamed in pain and fled. He ran out of the house, leaving a trail of blood in the sand, and collapsed exhausted in the driveway. It turned out that there was another brother in the house, 39-year-old Leland, who had been carelessly sleeping this whole time. He was awakened by AJ's horrific scream. Looking out the window, Leland saw his bloodied brother on the path. The man rushed to the phone to call 911, but he didn't make it. At that very moment, a crazed Brett pounced on him. A fierce fight broke out between the brothers, which rolled through the entire house, turning it into a bloody mess. Taking advantage of the moment when Brett was distracted, the wounded Leland managed to slip out unnoticed, crawl to the neighbors, and lose consciousness on their doorstep. The good people immediately called the police. Meanwhile, the enraged Brett dashed back into the yard, catching a glimpse of the wounded AJ, who was trying to crawl away, bleeding. Obsessed with the desire to finish off his younger brother at all costs before he attracted the neighbors' attention, Brett chased after him. Chapter 12. The finale of the bloody drama. As he pursued AJ, Brett suddenly saw that Leland had managed to fully rat him out to the neighbors. From that point on, the guy no longer had any chance of salvation. The police were about to arrive at the crime scene and put an end to his bloody odyssey. The brilliant plan for the perfect murder had crumbled to pieces. In despair, Brett decided to surrender. Unhurriedly, he returned to his mother's house, grabbed a bottle of water, and settled on the porch, patiently waiting for the arrival of law enforcement. When the first patrol cars and an ambulance pulled up, the medics immediately pronounced Susan and Chris dead. AJ was still showing signs of life, but was in extremely critical condition. On the way to the hospital, he died from his injuries. As for Leland, although he was hurt, he survived. He was urgently hospitalized and provided with the necessary medical care. Over time, the man began to recover. Chapter 13. The shocking truth for Kristen Brett was arrested at the crime scene and faced terrible charges of triple first-degree murder and attempted murder of his brother. The news stunned Kristen, as there were only 3 weeks left until the wedding. The unfortunate bride learned the horrifying truth about her beloved for the first time, his criminal past, conviction for robbery, financial problems, lack of a job, and the gruesome murder of his own family. How could she have lived under the same roof with this monster for so long? The shocked girl immediately canceled the wedding. Returning to the apartment, Kristen discovered the contraption Brett had crafted himself for his alibi. Not understanding what this strange gadget was, she mistook it for an explosive device and frantically called the police. Law enforcement officers arrived at the scene, promptly evacuated the building's residents, and began cautiously examining the mysterious device. It soon became clear that it posed no danger, but the cops were amazed by Brett's extraordinary ingenuity and scrupulousness. One couldn't deny his intelligence and inner strength, which unfortunately he had channeled in the wrong direction. If only Brett had chosen the right path in life from a young age, his potential could have brought much good to society. Chapter 14. Admission of Guilt and Sentencing. At the court hearing, Brett decided to plead guilty. He made a deal with the prosecution, agreeing to have his actions qualified as a triple second-degree murder. Trying to mitigate the sentence, the guy claimed that he had only planned to scare his mother with the crossbow and have a serious conversation with her. Allegedly, he wanted Susan to finally understand and support him. But unfortunately, everything got out of control. Brett swore that he had not intended to do anything to his brothers. They had simply ended up in the wrong place at the wrong time. However, the prosecution insisted otherwise. In their firm belief, the defendant had planned from the very beginning to brutally deal with his mother, not just talk to her. The prosecutors argued that Brett had taken the crossbow with him specifically to kill Susan, and therefore must face severe responsibility. As a result, the guy was found guilty of first-degree murder of his mother and second-degree murder of his brothers. The court handed down a harsh sentence: 3 life terms with the right to parole no earlier than 25 years. In addition, Brett was sentenced to 10 years for the attempted murder of his brother Leland. All punishments are to be served simultaneously. This means that the guy will only be able to seek early release in a quarter of a century. The sole surviving brother Leland greeted the verdict with relief. Despite all the pain and bitterness of loss, he sincerely respected Brett for his expressed remorse. In Leland's deep conviction, his younger brother was not a bad person at heart, but had unfortunately become hopelessly lost in life. Brett had stepped onto the slippery path of deceit and eventually got completely mired in the quagmire of his own lies. He could no longer extricate himself from it, which led to a terrible tragedy. Brett Ryan's horrific story serves as a warning to us all. It vividly demonstrates how seemingly small lies and concealing the truth can lead to dire consequences. At some point, the lies grow, accumulating new details, and become uncontrollable, ruining not only the deceiver's life, but also the lives of their loved ones. Brett had every chance to get on the right track after his first prison term. He had the support of his beloved girlfriend and family. He could have gotten an education and found a job. However, the guy chose a different path, the path of untruth, which ultimately led to a terrible tragedy and destroyed more than one life. It doesn't matter whether Brett acknowledged his mistakes sincerely or if his remorse was merely a way to soften the sentence. What's much more important is what conclusions he will draw himself while serving his life sentence. Will he be able to rethink his life and at least try to become a better version of himself? Only Brett himself knows the answer. However, his story definitely makes us reflect on our own actions. In conclusion, I would like to emphasize once again, honesty and responsibility are not just pretty words, but a vital necessity. It's important to value our loved ones, trust them, and share our problems with them. After all, it's much easier to overcome difficulties together and find a way out, even from seemingly hopeless situations. Only on a solid foundation of truth, trust, and mutual support can we build a happy future. And perhaps had Brett Ryan known this, he would have never set foot on the wrong path that led him behind bars. This story should serve as a lesson and reminder to all of us that our most precious treasure in life is our family and loved ones. So let's cherish them, respect them, and above all, be honest with ourselves, because self-deception is the first step towards a real-life tragedy.